and he was so confident. And I was watching him, and it reminded me of like the Isle of Man TT races when they're like swerving around rock barriers, at 200 miles an hour on a 1,000 cc bike. He was doing the same thing with trees. He was just kind of nonchalantly like moving his body, his torso around these trees as he's whizzing by. And he's just like, I love this. I love this berm. I love this rock section. I love this da 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 da. This. And I'm like, whoa, wait. Like, okay. And so instantly I'm like, okay, I can throw all the stuff I was thinking away.
Welcome to Trail EAffect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail EAffect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail EAffect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 193, we're joined by Uriah Nazario and Brock Wagner, two people who played key roles in the creation of Beyond the Ashes, an adaptive trail story. This film centers on the experiences of adaptive mountain bikers and the evolving efforts to make trails more inclusive through universal trail design in the land of Oz trails. We talked with Uriah and Brock about what inspired the project, the stories that stood out during the project, and how this film contributes to a broader conversation about accessibility and the future of trail development. Cooley Creative is the title sponsor for this episode. They design and build custom websites, as well as help companies with branding, photography, and e-commerce. Cooley Creative was started in Wisconsin, but is now based out of Bend, Oregon. Jared from Cooley Creative is a friend of mine. We've traveled together on multiple mountain bike trips, and sometimes he sends it. For more information about Cooley Creative, head on over to www.dudejustsendit.com. Yes, that's right, www.dudejustsendit will get you to the Cooley Creative website, so check it out. Trail One Components, exceptionally crafted mountain bike components that support great trails. I personally run the Crockett Carbon Bars, the American-made Rockville stem, and the Hell's Gate grips on both my Trail Light and Enduro bikes. These parts are the real deal, lightweight, bomb-proof, and comfortable for my old hands and wrists. Trail One goes beyond great gear. Every component is named after a real trail, and a portion of every purchase goes directly back into trails. So when you upgrade your bike, you are also giving back to trails. When you purchase Trail One components using the affiliate link on the Trail EAffect website or in the show notes, you are not just supporting your favorite trails and upgrading your bike, you are also supporting this podcast. Trail One components offer a lifetime warranty along with fast and free shipping. Now on to the Trail EAffect with Uriah and Brock. Here we are today on Trail EAffect. Today I have Uriah Nazario, who is the VP of Soft Surface Trails for Trailblazers in Bentonville, Arkansas, along with Brock Wagner, who is the Director of Photography. And today we're talking about a new film that's coming out called Beyond the Ashes, which is a documentary about adaptive mountain biking in Bentonville. Let's go to Uriah first and maybe talk about the backstory on how this project actually came to be, because I think I've heard a little bit, but let's kind of get into the weeds and how this came to be to really make this reality.
Sure. So we were kind of tasked with this, trying to look at where we were kind of missing, our user groups throughout the trail systems around here, and how we could kind of broaden our spectrums of riders. Bentonville's a unique place because we oftentimes have the ability to try to dive into places and things and trails and with the way trails are built in a kind of innovative way. And this was kind of one of those that we were tasked with, two main consultants, which was Brian Carlson and Jeremy McGhee. And these guys were, really came from different styles of riding on their AMTBs. Their bikes were drastically different. One was real skinny with one single wheel up front and two in the rear, and the other one was two in the front, one in the rear, and much wider track. Jeremy McGhee's bike was built like a off-road race rig, like a Baja 500 truck, and Brian's was you could tell was more focused on lightweight and more long distance. And so we got to really pick the brains of these guys and get their perspective on the trails and just kind of what the low hanging fruit was for the trail system here, because we really pride ourselves to have trails that people can ride to from their homes. And it's a really unique characteristic for our trails. And so we're like, hey, what do we have to do to make, a potential trail completely open for you to ride solo and be unassisted? And so when we started diving into this, we found out a lot of times that it was small, a tree gate or a rock crossing that was too skinny, or something that may, be a little bit too off camber, that if they stopped, it was, like a tripod and they would just fall over. So we just had them kind of tasked with going out and calling these things out. And, of course, us being fools, we're like, hey, telling the community, we're really working with these adaptive riders to make the trails to where they can, have these miles and miles of trails opened up to them. And the backlash for some of the people were like, oh, you're going to ruin the trails. Oh, this is, I can't believe, typical. And just literally like these gatekeepers trying to have all these preconceived notions. And we're just like, hey, we just got to change like 3 things on this trail. And so we just went after it and did it. And it was like, nobody knew we even made changes for the most part. There was maybe 1 or 2 that they were just like, huh, what happened here? And so it was really wild to see that. And then sure enough, now you have these adaptive riders that are now not having to find a support rider. They don't have to find, potentially a trailer. They don't have to, they don't have to have this high dollar special specific rack. They can just simply open the garage door and ride and get miles of trails out into the woods. And that was just like, as soon as we started working on that, it was like, okay, this needs to be documented. And of course, Jeremy is like, I know a guy. It's got to be Brock. He's got to be, spoken wheel. He's worked with them and so that's how we got to working with Spoken Wheel. Is this kind of grew into this thing that we really kind of wanted to document more and more of, especially with Jeremy, and tell the story of it. And then it just more and more things started to come together with it, where we had solidified a grant to build some more progression and trails around Bentonville. And so it just happened to be like, I don't know if you've ridden the Oz Castle, one of the most iconic spots here, but we were tasked with adding 2 more trails to kind of really fill the void of progression there. And so we're like, hey, let's start to build this to these adaptive cycles, and let's really dissect how we build trail, and let's see if we can, really utilize, the layout of their bikes and make a trail that can really accommodate them for riding gravity. And we were kind of off on all these things all at once, and it just really started to pick up steam to where it just started to become a much bigger story and a much more in-depth, task of really going into the perspective of these AMTB riders. And I tell you, I mean, it completely rewrote the way I look at trail and building trail. And it's wild because we had such a great group of guys like, Ethan Edmond and Hogan Kosis, and then our trail crew here to really sit there and work with these consultants on these adaptive bikes. And we would, we looked at these jumps, and in order for us to get the radiuses big enough for these longer wheelbase adaptive bikes, we had to like elongate the takeoffs, make the landers huge, get rid of the knuckles, like really smooth over these tabletops to where there were just these massive rollers with these really easy, like little lofty, like run-ins to them. And we got to that point because we took Jeremy McGhee and we shot him into space with this ATV ramp at my house into a moto airbag. And Brock and his team were filming it, and we got to see it in just super slow-mo and really look at the trajectory of these AMTB bikes. And what was wild was, it's like you have such a different weight distribution on these bikes, having two wheels up front, having a motor up front, or having two wheels in the back. And their suspensions are all different. And nobody's really there to really nitpick and set their suspensions up as well. We had some riders at the Ozaza off-road event that had, like 250 PSI in the left shock and like 80 PSI in the right shock. And they're trying to jump the bike. And, it's like nobody told them any, they just kind of going off a feeling. And so we're like, man, how can we take some of the risk out of this thing? And it was, oddly enough, building bigger jumps than we ever thought we were going to need to build. But in doing so, it made these massive safe radiuses for these bikes of all different lengths and sizes and weights to just send them all on this, this trajectory that was almost all identical. But because our previous jumps that we had built were just the takeoffs were a little too short, and you were getting a bucking effect. A lot of the front ends of these bikes were just absolutely cratering into the front side because, their rear tire is still trying to take off the ramp while the front's trying to land at the same time. And so it was just this kind of wild deal to see in person and how everybody was hitting them. And then as soon as we started really working on these jumps, then man, it's like people were really starting to, you can see their confidence was starting to build insanely progressively on these trails. And as soon as they started to get comfortable with it, it was just game on. And I could talk for hours on this. This is absolutely is some of the coolest stuff we worked with. But I don't want to cut Brock off.
No, you're good.
Amazing film that he has put together. Because I mean, it's watching this film and the stories and just getting these people out into the woods again and getting that adrenaline and that freedom, that we all come to love with riding our bikes or mountain biking, and why we do it. Absolutely. And we're even though it's a smaller niche group of riders, it's because I think there's a lot of riders that have never had that ability to try it. And, it's an adaptive bike was normally built in a garage, and, they could only, produce 1, 2, 3 a year, and they were expensive. And, it's something you had to be really passionate about. And now, we've got companies like Lasher, Bowhead that are really starting to get out there and have, e-assist bikes that are just changing the game for adaptive riders. And it's like this turned into be such a huge communal endeavor with, the Ozark Adaptive Sports Association. Now they have a fleet of Lashers and Bowheads, and they're getting people that may not have the means to buy these or may not even know that it may be something they're interested in, and they're letting them go and take them out and trying to get them out to go on rides. And so you're seeing this whole thing that's kind of like mountain biking back in its infancy, doing the same thing over again, and it's just starting to grow. And now they've got trails, that are intermittent in our network of Oz trails that they can go out and just absolutely have it, such a great time doing this stuff. And it's like us, when we go out for a mountain bike ride, we come back and like we're in such a better mood. Everything's so much better, great, and and it's so much easier to deal with some of the hardships that we do. And it's the exact same thing for these riders, and being able to give them that is just absolutely like one of those things that just keeps, our trail crew and everybody here is so absolutely gung-ho about getting more and more of these trails out there.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. We're gonna get into even more of the weeds here with Brock. Let's rewind a little bit, Brock, with how you got brought in, as we've already disclosed, which was through Jeremy. But how you got brought in, and maybe, some of the stuff that you had to do on the front end to get ready to film a documentary like this.
Yeah. So I originally met Jeremy, I think 2019 or 2020, and Visit Bentonville had called me and wanted me to do a little piece because I think he was traveling at the time. And you're right, you might be able to correct me here. He was traveling through and kind of working for basically rating adaptive trails for trail forks. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yep. He was doing that, and he was staying at Kohler. in Bentonville and was, camping there and raiding stuff. And they wanted to do a little piece about him. So they called me down there and I came and worked with them. And then we just became, best pals and hung out and, rode and talked and, did everything together at that point. And fast forward, I think, to like maybe summer or fall of 2022, he had been talking to Uriah and Kiara at Trailblazers, and they wanted to do a little documentary, right? It was going to be called Fish Out of Water, was the original piece we were going to do. And it was basically about the story of Jeremy and what he was doing and how he was going to come and work in Bentonville and help with the trails with Uriah. And it was going to be a little 30-minute documentary about how, because he was a surfer out in California, and Fish Out of Water was kind of the name that I think Jeremy actually came up with, and we loved it, so we went with it. So we all sat down and had coffee and figured it out and had a plan and had a budget and then the whole 9 yards. And I think it was December of 22 when we actually started filming, and that's was doing the airbag and stuff out of Uriah's. It was like 3 degrees or something. It was awful. Had to calibrate my cameras every time I turned them on. It was a nightmare. But yeah, so and further as we went further on, we started talking to people. We'd run across other adaptive athletes on the trails, and very quickly it was like, this is way bigger than Jeremy. This is what's happening here. Is there's so many other personalities and other people involved, and it felt kind of like an injustice just to make it about Jeremy. Even though he's a huge part of the film and kind of the backbone of how we got started with this. And if Jeremy, his character, and like I think it'd kind of be a little dry or a little drier without him. But yeah, so it turned into something like, well, let's just make a full-length feature documentary. And it kind of went from there. And then, we filmed for 3 more years after that. I think I've ridden my bike maybe 3 times since then, because I'm just running up and down the trails with a 30-pound camera. So, but yeah, it got no, I wouldn't say out of hand. So, but it fruition into what the story was supposed to be about, which is what the Trailblazers are doing for these guys and the tenacity of these riders and the heart they have. And, when I go out and ride, I'll complain like, man, this is so off camera. This is not fair. You can't ride this. And then you see Brian Carlson just completely laid over, dragging his ear on the ground, just whizzing by you. And it's like, okay, maybe I should, take a check here and realize some things. So,
well, that's a good segue into Brian Carlson, because, he's another key personality that was brought up early on. And so how did you blend Brian Carlson and the others into what Jeremy was doing?
Me?
You want me to take this?
We'll start with Uriah, then we'll go to Brock. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, Brian Carlson, he was mainly riding the Greenway, and he got to talking with Gary Vernon, and those two kind of talked, and I think Brian planted the seed with that, and then it just turned into a little bit bigger conversation of like, hey, like when it got brought to Trailblazers, Gary told me like, hey, go meet Brian, adaptive rider, out in in Bella Vista, and go kind of pick his brain and see, about these adaptive trails and what needs to be done. And, me, I didn't know what to expect. It was kind of preconceived notions of this guy that was just going to be like, just kind of putting around and being like, hey, fix this, do this, blah, 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 blah. And I met Brian, and he just left me. Like, honestly, like he took off, and I'm like, oh shit, I gotta go after this guy. Like, and he was gone, and it took literally all my strength to try to catch up to him, and he was just absolutely reckless. Like he was so insanely fast on this bike that it looks like, if you breathed on it wrong, it would tip over. And he was so confident, and I was watching him, and it reminded me of like the Isle of Man TT races when they're like swerving around rock barriers, at 200 miles an hour on a 1,000cc bike. He was doing the same thing with trees. He was just kind of nonchalantly like moving his body, his torso around these trees as he's whizzing by. And he's just like, I love this berm, I love this rock section, I love this this, and I'm like, whoa, wait, like, okay. And so instantly I'm like, okay, I can throw all the stuff I was thinking away. and really listen to this guy. And it was doing that, he started in and kind of helping us. And he had written his own kind of guidelines of like, hey, if you're building trail, this is what an adaptive rider is looking out for. And this is kind of what, he kind of broke it down like an IMBA segment where this is a green, this is a blue, this is a black, and what the radius of the turns needed to be and what the camber and all these things were. And so that really helped us kind of set a guideline. And then, of course, then you have the addition of Jeremy coming in as well.
Yeah, funny to hear you say that, because the first time that I ever filmed Brian Carlson, we were at the top of basically on Train, right after the wooden bridge where the rock garden starts. And I'd never seen him ride. I just preconceived that he was going to be slow. And so I'm at the top of that rock garden just with the handheld. And I'm like, I'm just going to follow him down, right? Like I'm just going to walk behind him and film him as he goes down. He's like, maybe 4 feet into that. And I was like, he's just gone. I'm like, and I'm trying to run down that big rock garden on train just like a cannonball. It was awful. But yeah, he's quick and fearless.
Yeah. And so it was wild because we had two consultants that were both really fast, aggressive riders, but in totally different styles with Carlson and McGhee. And so we even brought in Annijke Wade and started getting her input on the Furnos Trail at the castle. And, she's awesome rider. And she was a great sport and helping us. And she was these with Brian and Jeremy, they're like, hey, build this berm bigger because I'm like locking into it, at speed. And Annika's like, hey, that's cool. But, if you're somebody that's never in this trail, you're going to be doing this and taking this line and looking for this. And we're like, thank you. Yes, that's what we needed to know, And so we really got to see through the lens of somebody that just got to town, on an AMTB bike and, just kind of doing a pre-ride roll-in on and it was like, hey, listen, that berm's great, but you have to have a flat spot for me to get by when I'm first checking because I'm not going to be at trail speed. It's not going to hold me in. I'm going to fall right over. So it was just one of those things that we were quickly like, okay, we can make these changes and really try to hit that full spectrum of AMTB riders.
Well, that brings up a good topic that Jeremy actually asked for me to ask Brock.
Oh.
You'll like this. Jeremy asked me to ask Brock what your perspective is on the various adaptive bikes. Uriah has brought up that there's a whole bunch of different adaptive bikes out there as far as their configuration, the amount of suspension they have, the fact that wheels, like the Bowhead, the wheels tip back and forth, right? Similar to a regular bicycle. But since you were behind the camera on all this, how did you see this all unfold, and what did you think about the different capabilities of these adaptive mountain bikes?
I think after Uriah and I think it was Ethan, maybe Hogan, I'm not sure that Uriah would know this a lot more. But after they dialed, like Jeremy, like I've got PTSD from watching Jeremy jump before Uriah helped him out because there were times like especially whenever he at Wonderland the drop at the end first time we filmed it, everybody was scared. We even had a EMT on site because we're like, this might not work out so well. And the first time he did it, like I don't know what kept him from cartwheeling over end on that, but he didn't. He made it. But now we watched him several times just bomb nosedive out, and he's got no fear. He doesn't care. He just goes every time. But after they dialed him in, it was like this switch went off with his bike, and he was just skying everything after that, and just like smooth landing, perfect. It's just like. It was pretty rad to watch him be able to do that, and the change they made just from working on that lander, I think, and making some suspension adjustments and stuff like that. And as far as to answer your question about the different bikes, they are different. The lashers don't seem to be able to do the kind of stuff that Jeremy's bike can do, and it's Sport On. Is that the name of the brand of his bike?
I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
I might have that wrong, but. Yeah, and you don't see a lot of bikes like Jeremy's. You see mostly lashers and mostly bowheads now. It feels like, from my perspective, that the Sport On is more of that big, cushy, flying, adaptive bike, and the other ones are more technical based.
Yeah, I think a good comparison would be like a downhill bike versus like a cross country bike, and for regular mountain bikes, right?
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
I can understand what you guys were thinking. I remember when I saw I think it was a Instagram story of Jeremy going off that drop.
Mhm.
And so I remember seeing video of it. And then spring of 2023, I was in town riding with Jeremy, and we had just ridden, or we were about to drop into Fireline at Kohler. He's like, okay, he actually told me before he dropped in, he's like, I'm going to tame it down this time. I've been sending it too far on this one feature, that the bridge into the drop type of thing. You can roll it, but if you send it becomes a drop. We went to the bottom, and Jeremy's eyes were like the size of saucers. I'm like, what's up? He's like, I sent it deeper off that thing than I ever have in my life.
Yeah.
We just talked about how you were going to dial it back.
Oh yeah. He would always, we would sit there and plead with him. But I mean, Jeremy was a stunt man. And that he was just so gung ho. It was pretty awesome that he would see something and be like, yeah, no, I think I can do that. And we're like, okay, cool. You want to warm up? And no, let's just do it. And it's just like, oh my God, and so we would all need medical attention afterwards, just because, the man's, we were watching his feet dangle, we were genuinely in fear of him breaking his ankles when he would hit the ground, because it was a decent drop, and his feet are just kind of loosely kind of going. And we would watch the slow-mo footage, and it was just like, man, because Jeremy's got this, deal where when he gets injured, he gets this sick feeling, but of course, he doesn't know he has a broken ankle. So it's one of those things that, like, we're trying to be overly cautious, and this man is like, I'm going to just send it and go big. And hey, is the camera rolling? Like, make sure it's on me, and I'm going to go. Here we go. And so it was really awesome, because he would definitely prove us wrong on a lot of things that we were like, I don't think that's AMTB friendly. And he's like, nope, I did it. Just did it. So it was pretty fun and pretty wild experience, and something that now I absolutely build trails with those riders in mind. And it's very cool, because there's absolutely going to be more that progress to that level as well.
Well, and I think that's a big misconception in the mountain bike world, that if you're going to make an adaptive friendly trail, it's like a paved sidewalk in the woods. And that's not the case at all, right?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it's like Brock was saying, the end of train, it's one of our little steep rock tech sections. And, it's just one of those that I wish there was just miles of it, but it's one of those that, it's definitely, it used to really, on the older frame bikes, really like bend and break chain stays and stuff like that, because it was just a really hard technical chunk. And these guys, they were breaking some of the adaptive frames on it, but they wouldn't stop. They would get a new frame in, and then they'd go back and do it again. And then they're adamant that it was on the enduro, like that they would be able to do it and ride it. And the same thing goes for, a lot of the trails at Kohler that they would use for some of the enduros and things like that. So, and when you look at Jeremy's, was it Go Sport or
Sport On?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. But, you look at it closely, and you're seeing Heim joints, and you're seeing like really gusseted, reinforced A-arms and stuff like that. And it looks like a trophy truck. And you're like, this thing is built really well for a lot of gnarly stuff. And man, yeah. And I get it. I would absolutely want that as well. So it's pretty awesome.
Diving back into the film, Brock, now that you've got this film, I guess you could say, in the can, if you're using like lingo, like film lingo, right? I'm not a filmer, so I'm just kind of making that up, but
Correct.
Now that you've got it in the can, what is some of the stuff you took away from it? Maybe some thoughts you had coming into it that weren't the same as what you took away from it.
I think, coming into it, I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew it was going to be like we said before, it was going to be just a story about Jeremy. And as we move forward, like, you got to talk to Brian Carlson, you got to talk to, Maggie Frederick, you got to talk to, it just kept stacking up. And we had this big fear of, like, I don't want to leave anybody behind. You know what I mean? I had this fear of hurting somebody's feelings, right? Because the amount of work that the work that they have to put into to get out on the trails and do this. And, like Uriah was mentioning, it's really easy now because of what the Trailblazers have done for these guys to open the garage door, hit a mile or less of the greenway, and then they can ride all day. But for, a huge majority of people, of the adaptive riders, they have to, load up their vans, and they've got a $18,000 bike and a $6,000 rack on the back of their car. And by the time they get all that unloaded and get into their bikes, it's like a 2.5 hour process for them to get onto the trail. And, I was expecting it to be slow filming, and it was in some portions. But again, I benefited from what they've done down there because I was able to pull up to the parking lot, and half the time, Jeremy or Daryl or Brian would be waiting on me in the parking lot. Like, yeah, we just rolled around on hit some trails while we're waiting on you. So that was super cool to be able to deal with that. Trying to film this somewhere else would have been, a lot of sitting around and waiting, for production to actually happen. So
as far as how the film is set up, it's a documentary. Does it kind of jump back and forth between the different personalities, or is it kind of broken up into segments? I've not seen it, which is why I'm asking this.
Yeah, it's broken up into segments. It kind of, we tried to keep it very fluid. So it's more of a story, kind of jumps from what, the Trailblazers, then to individual riders. We talk about their injuries and some of the stuff they've had to overcome. Like we get in, we got too many riders in the film for each one of them to tell their story of how they were injured and the stuff that they went through. But we focused a lot on Annijke Wade and Brian Carlson and Jeremy, their injuries. Also, Daryl Kubak's, I think that's how you say it. Kubak, yeah.
I know. I never know.
I know it's spelled.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, Daryl.
We call him D-roll because we got a couple of Daryls, and his is spelled D-A-R-O-L, so D-roll. But yeah, so we didn't want to beat it over everybody's head and like, well, what happened to him? Even though that's when you see somebody in a chair or an adaptive bike, you wonder what happened to them. So we thought it was important to tell the stories of some of the injuries that had happened. And and then Annijke Beerton, we go pretty deep into her
car wreck.
Yeah. So I think I drifted off what your actual question was. The kind of the flow of the film. Yeah. So we jump back and forth. We really wanted to hit pretty hard. I mean, this story is in my brain 50-50 about the adaptive riders and the work, the initiatives that Uriah and Hogan and these guys and the Trailblazers have done. There would be no film if it wasn't for Uriah. There'd be no film if it wasn't for Jeremy McGhee and Daryl. There's just kind of the story was just there, and it had to be told. Especially since I'm really good friends with Jeremy, good friends with Uriah. Like this it's just right there.
Yeah, honestly, like I don't think we could have ever done it again. There's just too much that aligned for this project, and just it was so not to sound stereotypical, but like it was such a organic, like homegrown type of film that really it started off in just one direction, and it just kept growing and growing and growing, and it was just so much that we didn't care. Like we were just going to try to get it made, and this has taken so many people, so many, just to get this thing to the film festival, and in the stories, and it's like one of the guys, he had a film crew, and a film never got made, and so it's like he's just trying to, like there's so many stories in this that these people have probably wanted to tell, and we finally get a chance to put it on the silver screen, and that's the thing is like between that and between the grant timing and just needing this trail to kind of fill the void, and we had the Ozark off-road event, and we were trying to finish up this Furnos Trail, and it was a drought. Everything was powder, moon dust. It was horrible conditions. And then as soon as the event started to come up, it was just all rain. It was no in between. It was just raining every single day. And we sat there and we're like, I think it'll be dry enough that we can unveil this thing for these riders. And I think there was, Brock, you may know the specifics. I think there's like 42 adaptive riders that had showed up for this ribbon cutting for the Furnos Trail. And I sat there and looked, and as we, cut the ribbon, I looked and there was black clouds everywhere, all surrounding us completely, and yet it was not raining on us. And as soon as we said go, these riders all took off in a massive conga line and just started lapping this trail. And I'm sitting there going, like, trying to get intel, like, like one of the ladies comes by. I'm like, hey, what'd you think? She's like, yeah, I'm gonna do another lap and then I'll tell you. And then she was so excited, like she just like kept going and going and going. And so we just had this massive revolution of bikes just going down it, and everybody got like 2 laps in, and then it just started dumping rain. I mean, completely pouring. And so it was like it just held off enough. I mean, it's like everything in this whole storytelling, everything in this whole deal has just somehow made it fit. And it's like it's been the most stressful at times thing. And I know Brock is there, just as a filmmaker, just trying to get, things in order and trying to get things prepped to where we can just share this thing. And Brock was, fortunate enough to send me a cut of it. And I'm so freaking proud of this thing. And I am so excited to watch. And just if, as like trail building has been, it's like if people need information or want to do this in their community, like this is kind of a precipice. This is kind of a story that will help to where they can send, these municipalities or these places that are trying to get AMTB trails and say, hey, look, like, and like they did it. This is what happened. And that's the biggest joy is for me is to see what could be the reaction on the backside of this thing with getting trails built. And, it's like, I'm looking, in the trail news, and it's like, I'm seeing AMTB all over in like Vermont and Sorba and all these things. And it's just, man, this is absolutely awesome to see, these more and more AMTB trails getting built.
And it's understandable why, why there's a big, influx in it too, is because like they talk about in film, Jeremy talks about it, Cole Bernier talks about it. Just like they get their little bit of their freedom back, right? Like they get to feel something they couldn't feel just from like riding their chair on the sidewalk or whatever, but they can actually go and do something gnarly, and it's super rewarding for them. Like they get, they get it back a little bit.
Yeah. And as a person who's ridden with Jeremy, like he sends it, it's not, as you guys explained, it's not what you would think, which is incredible.
Yeah. And like we shot out at Leatherwood, and he was hanging out, riding with us. We were all doing downhill laps, partying, being stupid together, and being a bunch of, bumbling idiots. But we laughed the entire day, and then we partied, at the campsite at night. And he was just like, man, I felt like I was absolutely part of a crew, again, and it had such a great day. And the same with all the other adaptive riders. And, and that's exactly why we do it. Like a park day with your buddies is, some of the most memorable times you have on bikes, and being able to do that for anybody is absolutely awesome. As long as, they're still in one piece, at the end of the day, not going waiting for each other at the emergency room.
Yeah. Or the bikes are still in one piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Kettle Mountain Apparel, the brand that was built by travelers, hikers, trail runners, and mountain bikers, with the motto of venture far, laugh hard. While I definitely use Kettle Mountain Apparel for mountain biking, Kettle Mountain is also my go-to choice for daily wear, as it is super functional and comfortable. Kettle Mountain Apparel also offers a lifetime gear repair program with the goal of extending the life of their products while reducing waste in the process. If you ever damage any of your apparel, Kettle Mountain will repair it for free for life. By using the affiliate link found in the show notes or on the Trail EAffect website, a small commission will come back to the Trail EAffect podcast, which helps to cover the cost of expenses for keeping this show going. Let's talk about the Bentonville Film Festival. So this thing is going to be released, I believe, on June 19th, correct?
Yes.
And so this recording will come out just before that. But let's talk about how people can see it at the Bentonville Film Festival, and then maybe where they could catch it after the Bentonville Film Festival.
So it'll be at the Fermentation Hall at the Momentary, and that's going to be on the 19th at 1 p.m. I think it shows till 3:10, and there's potentially limited space. I think we're selling out because it is a local, it's kind of like a Northwest Arkansas story that's really being told. So I think it may be sold out. I think likely, but yeah, and I'll let Brock talk about the submissions to other film festivals.
Yeah. So as far to answer your question about how to see it after, I don't know. So Tim, our editor, is working through. There's a whole bunch of different rules on how it can be released if you're in film festivals, and we've got some streaming stuff lined up and some distribution companies that we're working with. So as soon as we know, we'll pump that out to the public on how people can see it. Hopefully, it's sooner rather than later. I think we are submitted for the New York Bicycle Film Festival. I may have that completely wrong. Santa Fe, and I think Bianca's working on a couple more, depending on what happens with the distribution stuff after this. We may keep hitting the circuit for next year. We missed a lot of the deadlines, and we really, really wanted to showcase this first in Bentonville. That was our main goal, and barely made. I think Tim wrapped, as you say, put it in the can maybe 4 days before the final deadline. So it was really close.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Bianca was typing up a storm all 4 days until.
Yeah.
And then we finally got okay. Yeah, it's accepted, and so we're on our way now.
Yeah, and thank God for Bianca, because once I was done filming, I was so tired and so much, because I got a full-time job and, doing production stuff other than this. And I was like, I can't do anymore. Like any of the PR stuff or reaching out to submissions and talking to distributors. And I just want to be behind the camera. I want to put down the camera and be able to go ride my bike again. Right. So
I feel the same way, Brock. I mean,
yeah,
it's getting into the production to getting this film out and about, and just all the things that this thing has gone through is just like, man, it doesn't, there's nothing more, I think, that makes me want to go into the woods and just run my bike and build trail.
Stare at fire.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, that's things like big Hollywood stars can, go, lay on the beach for 3 months afterwards after shooting. Us is we're going back to work, 7 a.m. the next day. So
yeah.
Hopefully it does make it into those film festivals. And I know a good friend of mine runs a film festival up in Marquette, Michigan called the Fresh Coast Film Festival. And that's like in October, and his name is Aaron Peterson. He's done a lot of mountain bike specific filming, both for like companies and trail builders. And I know that this is something that he would probably definitely love to see in his film festival. I just was at a film on Saturday night where I live in La Crosse, Wisconsin. You guys have maybe heard of the Ritual Film Tour. Mm-hmm. And that was just shown, where I live, because in La Crosse it's about monthly, but it's not every month, but they have what's called the La Crosse Adventure Film, which is basically, bringing in other film festivals, tours, or movies like this, to show it in a theater in downtown La Crosse. And I joke because the logo is La Crosse AF, and I think we can all go to a different place with AF. I don't know if that was done on purpose or not, but it's super funny.
That's awesome.
It would be great to see this film both be distributed, streaming and into these film festivals, because like you had mentioned, for other communities to be able to see this, for whether it's Parks and Rec directors, trail, different trail organizations, different landowners, just to kind of see what adaptive mountain biking really is versus what the perception of it is, because I think that in some people's minds, it's not exactly what we see it as, right?
Right.
For sure. And it's so cliched, we're raising awareness, but we are trying to raise awareness for these adaptive riders and the trail building that can coincide with it.
Yeah. And like you said, Uriah, I'm fairly certain that trails that are built in an adaptive way, the way you look at them now as a builder, most people wouldn't even realize that's the lens you're looking at it through. They just don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With that, is there anything else that you guys want to touch on before we wrap this one up? And I'm going to let Uriah go first on that.
I mean, no, there's just so many, like I said, so many people to thank. and really like that it went extra mile for this film to even come to fruition. And that's the thing, it's like Brock, his team, they're wore out. Bianca, she's one of the producers on this. She's absolutely like, she's so gung ho, and she's been just in a flurry state, just getting things done for the prep of this film. But the trail crew for Trailblazers, I mean, all of this, this all ties in to everybody that's built trail around Northwest Arkansas. It's like, this, you see this massive, castle that Rock Solid built in the background, for a lot of these shots. You see a lot of stuff, this PTD built out Kohler, and a lot of just, it's this whole community and all the trail builders that have built this network of trails here, to these riders that are now buying homes here. They're relocating their entire families because they have the freedom to ride out of their doorstep. And so telling the story and hopefully getting, these other towns' butts in gear to say, hey, look, if you can just give them the ability to get to the trail system from the, inner city, the inside of the town, then you're well on your way. And so with that, with the film, it's just this film, the guys did such an incredible job with the cinematography, with the storytelling, the editing. I was like, not trying to sound biased, but I was absolutely blown away with the final cut. I'm so excited just to let everybody see this, and just the product that these guys have produced is just next level. It's awesome.
Yeah, which was a byproduct for what you produced is the only reason we were able to do it. So yeah, and like you said, the community down there, it's just like we couldn't have done it without just like the selflessness of the community. I mean, when we would go to shoot, we always had to have support riders that had, and we, they were fighting over doing it, right? There'd be like 5 or 6, like we only need one. And, like people running to get waters and people, setting up tents and just like helping, right? It was pretty amazing to see, I mean, all the way back to whenever we were filming these guys building for NOS, we kind of from the ground up, they're out there with, just like setting up flags to the point where they hadn't even started yet. And literally like, the care that Robbie and Ethan would take just to like really lay that out and work and listen to the riders. And just like, it's not, you get this whole feeling back. It's not about me. It's about them when you're down there and on the trails with these guys. Surely they like to wrap up early and get on the bikes and test stuff out, which why wouldn't you? But they make sure that they're answering, questions and building stuff that the way these guys needed for on that for NOS trail. It's pretty cool to watch that all go down. But yeah, like, like we said before, this story kind of told itself. We just had to put in the legwork to go film it. Yeah. It was tough and it was hard and it took a long time, but man, when I watched the final cut myself, and I've seen, I can't even tell you, it was probably in the thousands of different versions that I saw. But when Tim said, "Hey man, that's it, we're done. This is the final one. I'm not doing shit else from now on." And we watched it. It's like, man, this is it. That's it. The music is good. The way it's put together is perfect. The flow of it's perfect. So yeah, it's pretty gratifying to see it all come to fruition and be done and ready for everybody else to go watch.
Well, Brock and Uriah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time today to come on the Trail Effect podcast so we can talk about this film. I mean, it's been a goal of mine to continue to provide coverage of adaptive riders. I've had Annijke Wade on the show. I've had Jeremy on the show. I've had a bunch of other adaptive riders on the show, and it's something I'm definitely going to continue to do. But the fact that you guys were able to film it, I mean, this is all audio. I can't wait to see the visual. So
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you guys very much. And I'm hoping everybody that, shows up gets the same satisfaction that you guys did. I'm sure they'll get more because it is an incredible thing. And at the end of the day, we're all getting out and enjoying trails and being on bikes. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you've heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail EAffect podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail EAffect podcast. Also, don't forget to check out Cooley Creative at www.dudejustsendit.com. For additional ways to help support the Trail EAffect podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail EAffect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain Apparel, Worldwide Cyclery, and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileeffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.